Off-Broadway
This
means
is
that
the
there's
tip of
between
Manhattan.
100 and 499 seats. And then there's off-Broadway, which is not a typo. That means that there's 99 seats or less. Doesn't matter where the theaters are. It really doesn't matter. It only goes by the size of the audience you draw. So when you say you're in an off-Broadway production, that means you performed in front of 100 and 499 people. Broadway, 500 on up. Off-Broadway is also called Black Box Theater. That's where a lot of us get our start. And that's the Broadway Bridge. Broadway Bridge connects Broadway Manhattan to Broadway, the mainland of America, and goes over, and now we're into one of the most peculiar bodies of water in all North America. They call this the Harlem Shipping Canal, which is a man-made canal they dug out in the 1800s to get ships around the island. When we dug this canal out, we actually severed off the northernmost part of Manhattan. The natural boundary of Manhattan is still about a quarter mile north of us. So these poor people in Marble Hill went to bed in Manhattan one night, woke up in the morning in the Bronx. They weren't too happy. But there wasn't a lot we could do. We needed a canal. So politically, they still belong to Manhattan. Geographically, it's the Bronx. Neither side really cares. Alright, through the trees on your left, you got Columbia University's athletic complex. Columbia U is a league school. That's about as all your colleges in America. It wasn't always called Columbia. They called this King's College. Another great wonder of the world. They didn't talk about it too much. Not the city, but... Well, they shut down King's College for the duration of the Revolutionary War. The war ended. Long story short, we have no more there. So we took the name Columbia. You are who you make people believe you are. Where does Columbia come from? What does that mean? Lady Columbia is the feminine form of America. America is the masculine name. Columbia is the feminine form. Now, go to the movies, you see Columbia pictures presentation. A very pretty lady dressed in a blue and white mantle holds up a gold torch. That's Lady Columbia. That's one of the early influences for the Statue of Liberty. Oh, guess who the model for Lady Columbia was? Audrey Munson, that's right. That was the iconic look of the turn of the last century. The short black hair, Boston white skin. Oh, there goes the kids jumping in the river here. Too late, we snuck up on them too quick. Well, sometimes bathing suits are optional. That's time they clean. Alright, now we're going on to the Henry Hudson Bridge. It hooks up to the Henry Hudson Parkway, goes right through Henry Hudson Park, right past Henry Hudson statue, right over Henry Hudson Cove, and right paralleling Henry Hudson River. So this would be a tough name to forget here in New York City. Well, Hudson was not the first European over here to discover America. The Vikings were here hundreds of years before he was. But he was the one to encourage Europe to come here en masse. And that was to exploit the fur trade. Unfortunately for Hudson, he never lived to see how it would pan out, because on his second trip over here, he was murdered. He was the victim of a mutiny. His own crew cast him adrift in an open boat in the area of the world known as the Hudson Bay up in northern Canada. And that was the last ever seen of Captain Hudson. But he was survived by two other sons, Richard and Oliver. Their descendants are living amongst us today somewhere here in the city. So Hudson's legacy continues. Right, now we go through the only bridge we go through. The bridge tender holds up the train traffic because we have the right of way. So we come to the Spuyten Duyvil Railroad Bridge here. We're going to wave to the bridge tender. There'll be one or two African Americans. It'll be Mike or Hank. We'll see who it is today. They usually come out in that cabin, give us a big wave. And today it is, that's Mike up there. Let me say hi to Mike. All right, now he's going to let the trains go right behind us. The train's waiting. Here we are back in the Hudson River, folks. That's where we started out. If you look straight ahead, you're going to see some of the most scenic views you're going to see here in New York City. These are the New Jersey Palisades. Look what you got here. Miles and miles and miles of pristine wilderness, virtually untouched since the beginning of time. And that will remain untouched until the end of time. That's right. Nobody's allowed to build or develop this area. The New Jersey Palisades is covered by the treaty between New Jersey. A good part of it, the Catholic Church. They got their monasteries up there on the right. And a very, very large part of it, the Rockefellers. The same thing with the last 118 acres of Manhattan. Inwood Hill Park, over here to your left, is the last sliver of wildlife refuge left over when the whole island looked like this. Inwood Hill Park It's the last piece of wildlife refuge. It's the whole island looked like here, at the beginning of time. It's what it looked like when the Native Americans, when the dinosaurs lived here. And this is what this section will look like when the sun goes down for the last time. Nobody's allowed to build or develop this part of Manhattan. It's a park. You can go up there, visit, walk through. But you can't knock down trees or build anything here. It's got to stay just like that. That's what Manhattan looked like. One big clump of rock. We change it with all skyscrapers, and bridges and tunnels and stuff. Now, the only thing that you see disturbing that pristine tree line up there to your left is the castle, which is the Cloisters Museum, which is another gift given to us by the Rockefellers. Now, John D. Rockefeller Jr., like many of us, had this fascination with the Middle Ages. Only he went over to Europe. He found 11 abandoned monasteries, almost 1,000 years old. Most lost more than half their structures to the ravages of time. And they weren't doing anything, just getting older. So he made deals with the French, Spanish, and Portuguese governments to buy the remains of these monasteries. He had a team of master stonemasons go over there and take them apart piece by piece, numbered them sequentially, photographed them three-dimensionally, and they put them on barges and sent them over here to America. We had a whole consortium of artists, engineers, historians, and they sat together and put together 5 complete pieces of work. We're all different mixed pieces of parts, as close as they could to the actual thing, and there you have it, the Cloisters Museum. That's where the Rockefellers lived for many years, when they were in New York City. And that's not where it ends, folks. It's only the beginning. The Rockefellers want us to not only go into the famous Cloisters Museum and see the famous unicorn tapestries and other interesting medieval art exhibits, but they want us to look out the windows and see the same thing that they saw 1,000 years ago. All right, everybody turn around, look over your right shoulders. Yeah, turn around, your right shoulders. Now, these are the views that you get from the windows of the Cloisters Museum. It's nothing but pristine wilderness. You got a big river, mountains, trees, something only a Rockefeller could do. And only a Rockefeller can cross the ocean, land on another continent, and buy a piece of time 1,000 years old, this big, and set it up in the largest urban jungle in the United States of America. And it all lends to that whole love-hate relationship we have here with the rich and the super rich. The Rockefellers, most of you know, they take the #1 spot on the list of the richest people of all time. No one else even comes close. Now remember that they were the world's first billionaires. They made their fortunes first in the industry of oil. They made so much money in the oil industry that they turned around and bought out the top 90% of the money-making businesses in the known world. They did a lot to rape and pillage our economy as well as our ecology to get the #1 spot, but don't forget the Rockefellers also take the #1 spot on the list of the biggest philanthropists of all time. They gave a lot back too. Many museums like this, lots of churches, hospitals where doctors and scientists make advances in human science and medicine every day. And they built us a lot of colleges too. Those are academies where average people like many of us can at least have the opportunities to go through and find out what our genius is, so we too can give something back and elevate our species. So again, that's all part of that whole bittersweet love-hate relationship we have with the rich and the super rich that collide and coexist amongst here in the city. But you got to look at them as just different characters that are here that contribute to the greatness and the aura of these cultures colliding and coexisting. Now, like the famous Beatles, John Lennon used to say, if all the birds of the forest sung the same tune, it wouldn't be music. We need that diversity. It's one of our strengths, our differences. It always brings out the best of everybody. And that's why we have this, the greatest city of all time. Our character. That's enough church for today. The next theme I'll talk about is the last theme I'll talk about before we take the next and the last break. It's the first bridge we saw, and the last bridge that we're going to go under. I have no problem getting under this bridge. It has the highest clearance. It's the George Washington Bridge. Number 20 for those keeping track. It's not just a bridge, but also a Revolutionary War monument named in honor of the father of our country, General George Washington, and his trusty aide-de-camp, General Charles Lee. Now, Washington and Lee had a series of 8 battles against the British in the Revolutionary War here in New York, and they had a perfect record. They lost all 8. But they won the big one, and that's what counts. This bridge connects Washington Heights, Manhattan, all the way over to Fort Lee, New Jersey, after those 2 great generals. Now, there was another famous General Lee that fought in the Revolutionary War in the southern states. His name was Light Horse Henry Lee. Light Horse Henry Lee's son graduated West Point Military Academy, topped with his class about 60 miles of the river behind us, in West Point Military Academy. Went on to become the general of the Confederate Army in the U.S. Civil War. His name was Robert E. Lee. Ironically, Lee's nemesis graduated bottom of his class in the same institution a couple of years later. Went on to become the general of the Union Army in the Civil War, the 18th president of the United States of America, and the presidential portrait that we have today on a U.S. $50 bill. His name was Ulysses S. Grant. Now, he wasn't born Ulysses S., he was born Hyman Grant. Wasn't born in New York City, though he did spend the last part of his life here, writing out his memoirs. He's born in Ohio. Grant grew up with what was believed to be attention deficit disorder and dyslexia. He's a very troubled young man in his youth. In fact, anybody that knew Grant when he was little gave him the same nickname. They called Grant Useless. Graduated high school barely. His grades were not good enough to get him into any college. There wasn't a whole lot known about ADD or dyslexia back in those days. Grant's parents thought that he was just plain lazy. Now, Grant's mother had a trick up her sleeve. She had gone to high school with who turned out to be the congressman. He was also a famous general in the Army at the time. His name was General Hammer. Alumni of West Point Military Academy himself. So she reached out to him for a favor, and he obliged. He took Grant's application to West Point, filled out himself, and what Grant's first name should have been, he drew the letters U.S. and circled it. That was his signal to his cronies on the panel of admissions up there that this kid is not smart enough to be here, but this is a personal favor.